Arriving at the Sarajevo airport was entering really a war zone that I had never seen before in my life.
I remember hearing my first gunshots. That was a shocking experience. I was like, tack, tack, tack. You know, it sets in that you're in Sarajevo, you're in Bosnia, in the war zone. You know that maybe those bullets could come and accidentally hit the truck and you could be in it and get hurt.
The minute we were behind the walls, we'd hear a and somebody screaming. One of the French got hit in the arm the very first 5 minutes, the second time on the ground. Myself, I was looking sort of towards that kind of thing. But everybody with me, their first time there, they didn't know, they were going, where's that come from? What's happening?
In terms of the supervisory role on deployment, I'm thinking now of those deploying soldiers who have responsibility for others' soldiers, their well-being, their welfare. We're often asked whether there's one thing or several things that would make a soldier susceptible to problems adapting to deployment stress. And one thing that we can say is that experience in and of itself does not provide immunity for adaptation problems.
Combat routine is recognized as stressful. Periods of intense activity are followed by periods, sometimes short, sometimes long, of waiting and boredom. No matter how well prepared the troops are, the reality of combat can only be experienced during actual combat. The noise, smells, cries, discomfort, fatigue, or sight of the dead and wounded. There is no really adequate simulation of the real thing. Every soldier has a breaking point, which varies depending on the situation and the individual. The likelihood of a stress reaction increases with the increase in intensity, duration, and type of conflict the soldier is involved in. In recent missions, Canadian peacekeepers have found themselves on several occasions facing situations for which they had been unprepared. The unknown is the most stressful of stress factors.
Another thing that often arises what we hear about is the conflict that presents itself in supervisors themselves between the orders they are given from above and their sense of responsibility for the welfare of their troops.
As a squadron commander, I found it a very sobering experience to have to issue orders to soldiers knowing that I was sending them in harm's way. An aspect that I didn't anticipate that I found interesting was that on a particular day, if you had a patrol out and soldiers were shot at, or if they faced some sort of experience out in the field, unfortunately, the following day, they were the soldiers who had to lead the next patrol back to the same area.
Our job was to do security on the hospitals. I gave my Master Corporal orders that he had to evacuate the nurses from Bakovici if the fighting got too tense. He called me on the radio and he said, there's mortars landing in the hospital area. I said, when you feel it's not safe, evacuate. He evacuated the nurses. Soon as he evacuated the nurses, there was nobody left for the patients. I had to think, I had to make a decision. I had to return him back to the hospital, even though I knew there was fighting going on. So I didn't know if I was sending him to save the hospital, keep a UN presence there, or if he's going to come back dead.
I think what's very pertinent is the fact that commanders cannot become introspective. They must continue to project outwardly. And in that circumstance, you can't simply assess what has happened and concentrate on what has happened. You've got to take stock of what has happened, the killings and casualties of your troops and your problems that you've had in achieving certain objectives, and then you got to immediately build on from there and look into the future.
Commanders of formations of deployed units may have additional personnel attached to them for a special mission. These soldiers, often called augmentees, may be reservists or specialists, each with stress factors particular to their own occupation. However, they must often deploy alone or in small groups and must work within a unit that is not their own.
We have found that these individuals, UN military observers and augmentees, are the soldiers who are most likely to be at risk for succumbing to deployment stress.
The difficulty as a reservist, as a priest in the reserves, was the fact that I cannot order someone who I perceive, along with other professionals, who needs help. Because they become civilians if they do not, almost immediately in the reserves, and are able to walk away. There are very little incentives to seek help that I can hold up to someone if they don't perceive a difficulty and are not able to be asked to stop and think.
The kind of problem that I had, or the kind of experience that I had, well, it's a men's world, and I think medicine as well is a men's world still today. So you have to be prepared for that. And of course, you know, they're going to do jokes, and, you know, they're going to try to know how far they can go before you get upset or before you get frustrated. But to me, that was a game, and I knew very well that that was the game. So I just went along with it, and I was serious doing my job, trying to be as professional as I could be. And from that point of view, I think things just started to go well, and they saw that I was professional.
Augmentees often deploy alone or in small groups and find themselves in the minority in their new unit. They must quickly come to form a hybrid team that must be as effective as those already on site. They are trained to perform a job that is unfamiliar to them, and they often have to deploy with little, if any, notice.
With the time of deployment, I had two very short experiences. The one being the first in Somalia. I was at home, got the first phone call on Saturday at 9 in the morning, and I was on a plane the next Sunday, the day after, by 6 in the evening. The second one was for my first deployment to Yugoslavia. It was the 24th of December in the afternoon. I had my leave pass for Christmas vacation in hand, and the phone rang in that afternoon, and they told me that I was going to Yugoslavia on the 27th.
We were preparing for a 1st of July ceremonies, 25th anniversary of 5 Brigade, and I got a call from my superiors asking me if I was ready to leave at short notice for a year, and I said yes. And then a couple days later I got the call saying, "You're going to Rwanda." And I said, "Fine, I think that's in Africa. I'm not sure." And they responded to the affirmative. And so we had a change of command parade where a lot of the guests thought they were still on a 25th anniversary parade.
Clearly, the task of adaptation for these groups is greater. The task is often made more complicated by language differences. And to top it all, the isolation of these members is often reflected in the isolation of their families, who are left outside established communication networks.
It's very difficult on the family, on the even just being able to adapt all the time. You know, 1 minute they're there, and he's doing the cutting the grass and doing the pool, doing everything, and then he's gone, and you're doing the housework and you're doing the outside work, and it's really difficult.
Being alone and being in a new base, whether it be in your own native language or in a foreign language, is difficult enough. But when you add the added stress of being an Anglophone in a French community or a Francophone in an English community, it adds an element of stress that actually I don't feel really needs to be there.
My husband is an ex-military. He used to be a soldier in an infantry battalion. So he knew that I wanted to go, and he was prepared for it. It was part of the game when we got married. Things didn't go as well as he thought while I was gone. He found that it was very difficult, and he was here in Montreal, and my unit was in Quebec City. So he was kind of excluded of all the support that was given to the wives back in Quebec. So they would send him paper and stuff like that and buy them, but of course he was here in Montreal. So he had very little support from the family support center as well as from the unit, but that was circumstantial more than anything else.
Unlike brigades where soldiers deploy and redeploy together, augmentees set off alone or in small groups. Sometimes their return goes unnoticed, and the augmentees could feel abandoned or betrayed by the system. Returning to the old job at their parent unit can sometimes be difficult because, again, they feel they may be the only ones of their home group to have deployed or to have any idea of what they went through during their mission.
When it comes to professional groups, these are the people who are at considerable risk for deployment stress problems. And this is because, as experts, they are often seen as not needing any help themselves. And yet, these groups, who can work hard at absorbing negative experiences from other deployed members, often have adaptation problems of their own.
It's very difficult to deal with the fact that you're a helper, and as well you're in the same situation and you need to be helped as well. It's lonely at the top. That's what they say. Well, it's pretty lonely for the helper. You have to help. You know, and also for me, like I was the commander of my section. So I cannot let my men know that I have psychological problem or sadness, or because I'm their support. You know, I have to support them. So if they feel that they have to support me, then it makes it kind of difficult.
Being able to talk about the 6-month experience was extremely important, but it didn't touch everything. There was something going on inside that I felt no one else knew about, that no one else was be able to understand, no matter how many words I was able to put together.
Every once in a while you need somebody, you have to be able to talk to somebody about that. You can accumulate that. I know that the individual that I talked to was the RSM. Whenever I would come back from a patrol or something that was, I would call a palpitating event, I would go and I would sit down with the RSM and chat it out and verbalize the entire thing using all of the techniques that distressed you. But I couldn't, because I'm the CO. I'm supposed to be the CO. You're supposed to have a grip of the situation, in total control of your emotions and all that. Well, yes, you're in total control of your emotions and you master the situation, but you have to have somebody to talk to.
Reservists also form a particular group. Some are civilians who have signed a contract to serve for a specified period, whereas others may work part-time at their parent unit. They are frequently young and single, and as a result, their families and loved ones have little contact with the support base. During their tour of duty, reservists have lived intensely with a unit of the regular force and have become identified with that unit. When they get back home, they have to leave all that behind and return to their parent unit, their home, and even to civilian life, to a job, a school, or even a future without a job. Commanders must be made aware and understand these particular stress factors in order to implement appropriate preventive and corrective measures.
In terms of adapting to deployment stress, there's not much we can do about the events and experiences that happen to us when we're there. But there is something that we can do about how well prepared we are, how well we're inoculated against the things that are likely to happen to us. And of course then there's the factor of what our own position is ourselves, and what state of mind we are in and the kinds of things that are happening to us in our own lives. Obviously, the person who is under stress already before they go on deployment is likely to be more vulnerable to the challenges of deployment when they get there.
Here are some of the stress factors that come into play before deployment. A lack of trust in the leaders, newcomers to the unit, equipment which is thought to be too old, obsolete, or unsuited to the task or situation, training which is seen as inadequate, unsuitable, or too rushed. Other stress factors to be considered are lack of public support, the cultural barriers, the purpose of the mission is unclear, lack of information, or too many rumors going around. The media coverage is bad, excessive, or otherwise inappropriate.
I can speak personally. I know that my wife and my children found a lot, had suffered a lot of anxiety watching Daddy on TV, and hearing the rounds exploding in the background, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that's going to have to be, I think, with the increasing frequency of the missions, there has to be some, considered thought put to how we're going to deal with the accumulated stress, not only of those who embark on the missions, but of those who stay behind and wait for us to come home.
We as Free Canadians, we are there helping people deal with what's going on in their country. The fact that the Croatians, the Muslims, and the Serbians don't care enough about their own civilian people to protect them. They're willing to slaughter them just to gain ground, and yet we're there to protect them. And in doing that, we lose two of our comrades, friends, family, whatever it may be. It's a very senseless loss of life.
The tactical situation itself can be a cause of stress. Thinking that the enemy is superior. Weather or climate too extreme. Death of members of the unit or well-liked leaders. Feeling of powerlessness. Threats and unseen dangers. All these elements have a cumulative effect.
Let's say that something serious happens during a deployment, during a tour. A critical incident, for example, someone is killed or seriously wounded, or there's an ambush, for example, something life-threatening, or something in some way that's traumatic to people. How does a supervisor assess the extent to which any given individual is likely to be affected by this? Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, we could ask to what extent was the individual involved in the incident itself, and to what extent did he or she have responsibility for the events that took place then. And then we could ask if there were people injured or killed, we could ask, was the individual close to these people? And of course, the closer the individual is to the people who are wounded or killed, the more likely or the more serious the fallout is for that person emotionally. And then there, of course, is the question of how long that person has been in theatre and what are the kinds of incidents that that person had to adapt to up to that point, if you like, the cumulative wear and tear of adaptation.
Before deployment, make sure that training is as realistic as possible. The personal affairs of your members are in order. There are pre-deployment briefings about the mission and deployment stress. Family members are invited to the unit's functions. Sponsors are appointed to look after the needs of the families of augmentees. Newcomers are well integrated into the unit. Supervisors are familiar with stress management techniques. The unit has stress management teams.
One of my Master Corporals, Master Corporal Bureau, was killed during crack and thump training. And up to that point in time, we had only discussed amongst the leadership of the battle group how we would deal with a combat stress scenario. We had discussed dealing with mass casualty situations and what structure we would have in place to do so. And it was all hypothetical up until that moment, that evening, when Master Corporal Bureau was struck in the neck with the bullet during the crack and thump training. And we had to deal with it on the spot. It was an actual casualty situation. There were many people who were in his close proximity to him in the trenches who suffered the effect of seeing someone being hit with a bullet and bleeding. So we had to deal with it that night. And after we had gone through what we said we were going to do, it became quite apparent to us that we didn't have enough debriefing personnel to deal with it. Because at the end, the debriefers had to be debriefed because they had been dumped, all of this emotion had been dumped upon them during the debriefing process. So that was the first thing. We had to deal with an actual combat stress scenario before we left, and that helped us realize that we didn't have enough people trained, and I approached my superiors in order to get more people loaded on courses in order to form them. And we went with a structure in place, planned and tried before we hit central Bosnia.
Probably one thing that helps a lot a senior or a commander is the fact that he won't have much time to ponder it. And in fact, you try to find a moment to just have those precious times where you can completely isolate yourself and feel that you can think of yourself for a few moments. And they tend to be looked for and cherished. And it gives you a chance to vet yourself, what has been held inside. So those moments are few and far between, but they're very useful.
Once on site, make sure that the troops live under the best possible conditions. Monitor the troops closely during the first 48 hours of a mission. Be close to your personnel. Encourage teamwork. Rotate tasks often, particularly when the situation is critical. Be as clear as possible about the mission's objectives. Pass on information to all levels. Allow the troops to talk openly to someone they trust. The better you know your personnel, the better you'll be able to control the symptoms of deployment stress. Victims of stress must not be removed from their unit as soon as the first symptoms appear. A decision must be made as to whether they can continue to function. They must be reassured that the reaction is normal. Give them some hot rations, dry, clean clothes, rest, and simple tasks and activities. Do not let victims of stress become dangerous to themselves or to others. The decision to evacuate victims to a treatment station or to repatriate them should only be considered if the situation does not improve after 3 days.
Over the course of our mission, various individuals reached their level of how much stress they could accumulate. And I had 27 cases of what I would call critical incident stress in ex-Yugoslavia. 3 of those individuals had to be repatriated back to Canada because they had ceased to function properly.
I think the first point, stress reactions, yes, you had that. You had people burning out more often than not. And a good 24 hours of sleep often brought them back, and monitoring subsequently made them still effective.
Before redeployment, have health professionals brief the troops on what to expect when they get home and how to cope with the readjustment. Once back home, it's important to monitor progress, particularly to see how reservists, the members of the debriefing teams, the doctors and chaplains are doing, and how you are doing too.
My personal experience tells me that for me it would have been more appropriate to be debriefed alone or with the other helpers, which meaning the padres, or because no one really think about how you feel as a helper.
I was there. I was gone for 6 months, 24 hours a day, and now I'm back. Click. 24 hours a day. The family had evolved. My daughter had gotten older, started wearing lipstick. You know, while I was gone, my son was now able to read. Things had changed. They'd evolved. The family had evolved, and I was out of it.
For myself, the first time I arrived in Canada, landing on the ground, the first week was like I was normal and back at home, and everything was correct. Everybody was happy to see each other, me and the wife. But after the first week, we've noticed that we actually did change. We weren't the same. It was very hard for my wife and myself to readapt to each other especially after the second tour, to how we have actually changed so much. It took a good 6 to 7 months to readapt, to find out how we were, and to get back into the swing of the things the same as before I went to Yugoslavia.
Let's remember that deployment stress is here to stay, that it's part and parcel of going on a peacekeeping tour, and that to adapt successfully to deployment stress, we must process the emotions, the feelings that happen to us on a daily basis, that we experience on a daily basis. Feelings are part of the process. They are not to be shut out or denied like they have been in the past. Rather, they must be welcomed and understood. Soldiers are soldiers, yes, but they are humans too. They have feelings, and they need those feelings to find a place in the way they are integrating their experience. And that is not altogether a bad thing.
Recent peacekeeping missions have shown that there are different types of stress. Realistic training, early diagnosis, and appropriate response by members of the unit, together with good leadership and understanding of what stress is and appropriate follow-up after redeployment, are the keys to completing a mission with a minimum of damage. As a leader, you must be familiar with the measures, and you must see to it that they are implemented. Remember that every human being has his limits, but that with help and appropriate measures, soldiers can emerge from the increasingly difficult and complex missions entrusted to them, enriched, and having gained a sense of personal growth.